Leigh Whannell may have a short filmography when it comes to being behind the camera, but with The Invisible Man, he knocked it out of the park. And now he's taking on another classic horror story with Wolfman. Is it going to be good enough to cancel out the typical January slump of movie releases? A family at a remote farmhouse is attacked by an unseen animal, but as the night stretches on, the father begins to transform into something unrecognizable. This stars Christopher Abbott, Julia Garner, Matilda Firth, and Sam Jaeger, where the first three are a family from San Francisco who travel up to Oregon to pack up items that belong to Abbott's dad, who disappeared years earlier. Now, right off the bat, this film is very predictable. It's got many sequences that are either telegraphed early or so formulaic that you shouldn't be surprised by what the story brings. But that doesn't mean it doesn't hold some excellent tension and thrills. Whannell uses a less is more approach to this monster fest. It's probably close to at least halfway through the movie before we even begin to get a decent glance at what growls in the dark and torments the family. And despite the obviousness of the story trajectory, the production gives us enough time with the characters to become mildly attached to them. I mean, we don't spend an inordinate amount of scenes with them to know everything that makes them tick, but we're shown a powerful and protective dynamic between Abbott and Firth, who plays Abbott's daughter. Now, they have this sweet relationship, despite Abbott's fierce and somewhat dysfunctional upbringing, which we also see a bit of just to establish his mindset. And then the relationship between Abbott and Garner, it's tense, but it's not angry. At first, we don't really know what causes the tension between the two, but small lines of dialogue clue us in along the way, never belaboring the point, just a couple of words that paint the picture for us. Now, the film opens to establish Abbott as a kid, and then transitions to the present where we follow him. But the opening sequence, it sets the mood for an unsettling and ominous nature. As a boy, he lives with his dad in a remote area of Oregon. It's beautiful, but it's also very isolated. And when that's coupled with the lore that is given to us in an opening title sequence, the whole setting takes on this threatening aura, where the surrounding vast forest hides all sorts of dangerous peril. And then, efficiently, the movie brings us to the present and gets the characters on their way to the farm. Now, I appreciate the expediency because we don't need to spend a whole lot of time outside of where the creepy action is going to take place. Once we arrive there, the film steps on the gas and it doesn't let up, moving us through a harried night of scares, violent action, and anxiety-filled exchanges. Now, the acting, it's pretty good and convincing, especially by Abbott. We see how he carries the wounds and scars of his upbringing and how he wants to do differently by his daughter. So he comes across as less confident or even weak, but that's out of a fear of causing emotional damage for her. He plays the timid character well, showing us the conflict that he carries in his spirit and then how it fights with how he wants to break the cycle that was started in him. And I like that we get to watch a progressive transformation happen. It's not exactly slow, and it's not immediate, allowing the characters really just to struggle with each new development. And even though you can tell where the next complication is going to come from, or what their move will be, the scenes are still filmed in a way that exploits the creep factor as much as possible. Sound design and limited lighting play a crucial role in establishing the dread that our characters experience. And it works for the audience too, making us strain our eyes to see something that may or may not be present in the almost total darkness. Kind of like in The Invisible Man, where you would stare at something because the camera's staring there, and you don't know if something is actually there or not. Well, in the movie, in these times, Whannell uses excellent techniques to give us different perspectives of our characters. We'll watch a darkly lit scene where a character is speaking. It's audible, and despite the lack of light, we still can see the character. But the other perspective comes from an infected character. And as the camera will slowly pan around to show the scene from the different viewpoint, the lighting becomes bright and vivid with this hyper-realistic coloring. It's almost like it's UV sensitive or something. And the sound, it becomes garbled and unintelligible. And this technique, it's used a few different times in the story, and it's wildly effective in both creating fear and anticipation, but then also adding in a bunch of emotional depth. Just really depends on the situation that it's used. And coupled with the transformation is the makeup that is used to create the creature effects. These are gnarly, at times uncomfortably graphic, and then heinous to look at. But they're executed brilliantly. Most of the changes we witness are slowly unveiled. Small things here and there. But towards the end, we get a larger transformation that is grotesquely awesome. The effects, they look to be practical, which most are throughout the film. But I couldn't tell if some of the changes were accomplished through CGI or if they were all created practically. But either way, what we get is painful and horrifying. Exactly what you'd want in a movie like this. Now, outside of the predictability of the plot structure, my largest complaint in the film is that the writing felt the need towards the end to spoon-feed a conclusive bit of visual and audible exposition, as if the writers didn't have faith that the audience would understand a couple of the connections. I mean, they were painfully obvious, but I guess really to avoid any uncertainty, the camera has to pan down to an item and then remove all doubt. We're also treated, maybe subjected, to a character's explanation of what's occurring. I mean, it felt like the characters all of a sudden became ultra dumb and then needed to over-explain the plot. This is one of those horrors that are a nice surprise. It's not a stellar film that's going to blow you away, but it uses sparse but isolated settings to build apprehension, presenting us with disturbing imagery and then urgent pursuits of likable characters. And the film feels shorter than its hour 43 runtime, keeping the pacing charging along without rushing the storytelling unnaturally. The violence and the gore will make you cringe and gag at key moments, and the relational dilemmas the characters experience create a large level of audience engagement. In the screening I was at, many people were yelling at the characters because of counterintuitive actions that were also somewhat understandable just given the circumstances. But when a movie can connect with an audience on a verbal level, you know it's working to create that bond that makes a horror like this so entertaining to see. Leigh Whannell once again surprises with a fresh retelling of a classic monster story. While the plot progression is obvious and the story isn't exceedingly deep, the character dynamics and ominous setting work together to create an emotionally connecting tale that can have you biting your nails, gagging at the visuals, and shedding a small tear at the touching tragedy. Expertly crafted makeup and practical effects make the imagery convincing and tangible, working to minimize the predictability and increase the enjoyment. While I know this isn't going to earn a top spot for the best horror of the year, it's still a good bit of escapism. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and a bunch of violence. I give Wolfman 4 out of 5 couches. So what other classic monster tales would you like to see Whannell take on? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.